Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm Blake, Education Programs Manager for the Trust, and I'll be talking about Motus wildlife tracking. I'll just give I think most of you all are familiar with the Trust, so I'll make this brief, but we are a nonprofit land trust in Newtown Square. Our program area is 28,000 acres, encompassing the Ridley, Crum, and Darby Creek watersheds. 1996, we've preserved 7,500 acres that will never be able to be developed, plus 3 nature preserves that I'm sure you all have been to, Rushton and Kirkwood and Ashbridge. And so over the years, our mission has sort of extended from simply land conservation to really connecting people to the land and sort of establishing a conservation ethic involving people in our many programs, including habitat stewardship. So on our 3 preserves, they're not huge. We're not like natural lands. All of our preserves are pretty small, but we do a lot with them. We try to demonstrate how we can all promote biodiversity through conservation initiatives, restore balance, often through plants. So like riparian plantings, planting native wildflower meadows instead of mowed areas to promote pollinators, all that good stuff. And you guys are familiar with Doug Tallamy, so I'm sure you know all about the importance of native plants. Then we have our Rushton Woods Preserve and Farms. This is where our regenerative agriculture, our community-supported agriculture program takes place. So regenerative really means beyond organic. So it's not simply that we don't use chemicals, but we really have gone back to the way that people used to farm before these chemicals came about in conventional agriculture. So we grow over 150 different varieties of vegetables on just 3 acres, 3 to 6 acres of farm within this broader 86-acre nature preserve. And so what we're demonstrating here is that you can grow food and sustain human populations while also benefiting wildlife. Traditionally today, they take place, farming takes place at the expense of wildlife. And we want to prove here that both is possible. And we have our watershed protection program, which is in partnership with the Academy of Natural Sciences, studying our waterways, things like microplastics, runoff, studying the macroinvertebrates in the water, so the aquatic insects that can tell you about the value, the purity of the streams. And then lastly, our bird conservation program, which encompasses bird monitoring, bird banding, and habitat restoration. And that mostly takes place on our Rushton Woods Preserve. That's where we've done most of the monitoring over the years. So over the past 13 years, through banding and monitoring, we have discovered 38 breeding bird species, including some Pennsylvania state responsibility species. And these are birds where Pennsylvania plays a huge role in securing its global population by providing 10% of the North American population during the breeding season. So these birds include beautiful ones like the wood thrush in the upper left, the scarlet tanager, and the worm-eating warbler. And these guys are all interior woodland nesting birds. And we do have Rushton, if you've been there, has multiple habitats. So you have the farm, which is a habitat. You have meadows, we have hedgerows, which is basically shrubland habitat. And then we have about 60 acres of mature woodlands, which links up to over 200 acres of more mature woodland. And it is actually one of the largest contiguous tracts of forest left in Chester County. So very important for many bird species. I think I'll skip over that video for now. Bird banding is what we do to monitor the birds at Rushton Woods Preserve. It is an activity that occurs throughout North America. It requires a federal permit and extensive training. So you get these bands from the government. It's just a little metal alloy that has a 9-digit number that makes that bird a unique individual from that point on. So it's mark, release, recapture. All the information that you get with the bird in the hand, species, age, sex, location, all gets recorded in a centralized database called the Bird Banding Lab. And we get a lot of good information, mostly about bird populations. But where it falls short is in the movement data. So the movement of these birds across the landscape and being able to connect the dots of their migratory pathways really doesn't happen a whole lot with bird banding, although there have been a few amazing recovery records. For the most part, it's less than 0.1% recovered. So there's a little loophole in bird banding. However, bird banding will never go out of style because, it does help us, like I said, to unveil population trends, whether birds in your forest are increasing or decreasing, survivorship, so how they're, making it from year after year, productivity. So we band at Rushton Woods Preserve during spring migration and fall migration, and then also during the summer to understand the breeding population. So how many babies are our breeding species having? What are the patterns there? Did we have a lot of ovenbird babies, ovenbird chicks one year and not the next? So productivity, longevity, we have had some really cool records. This is a picture of a veery. It's a little woodland thrush, nest in the deep woodlands. Has a beautiful song that spirals downward. And so we've been doing our summer breeding bird survey, our summer bird banding for 13 years. And this bird was caught in a couple years ago and was originally banded by us the first year of our banding. So the record says that this bird is 12 years old. So it's older than some of the little kids that visit the banding station, which is pretty amazing. And the bird showed up in our records summer after summer. There'd be a couple summers that for whatever reason, we didn't see her, didn't catch her, didn't have her in the hand. And then she'd kind of reappear the next year. So theoretically, she came to Rushton Woods every single year to breed in her 12 years of life, and which is, incredible to think when you understand that she goes all the way to South America and back each year. So a lot of good information on also species abundance and diversity. So at Rushton Woods Preserve over the past 13 years, we've banded over 18,000 individual birds of about 104 species, using the preserve throughout the annual cycle, including migration, breeding, overwintering. And then lastly, bird banding helps us to understand the value of what we're doing, and the value of land preservation, the value of these conservation initiatives. One of the things we're seeing through bird banding, particularly at Rushton, is what they call the central park effect. So we're seeing some upward trends in the number of species and the number of individuals that we're catching during banding seasons throughout the years. And we're suspecting that this is because of the rapid development that's happening in our region now. I'm sure you all have seen, it's just unprecedented. There's apartment complexes going up, it seems every day, and less places for wildlife to go. And so they're getting funneled to these few sanctuaries like Rushton Woods. So here, this is a map of our recoveries. So again, this is where traditional bird banding does fall a little short. So over the 13 years that we have been banding at Rushton, we only have 5 recoveries. So these are birds that either we band and then they show up at somebody else's songbird banding station, or they were originally banded at some other station and ended up in the hand at Rushton. We see the band and we recognize it's not ours. The bird banding lab gives us the information of where it was banded. So over the years, it's been a little American redstart, goldfinch, a white-throated sparrow, a gray catbird, and a northern parula. But we do recapture many of our own birds. So for those are birds like within the same season, we'll capture birds, that are hanging out for a couple weeks during migration, or they're breeding in the summer, or we'll capture birds, for example, that vary between years. So our recaptures are common, but the recoveries are the ones that are rare. And those are the ones that you get the movement information from. So we need to expedite conservation of birds and our understanding of birds because.
Hey, Blake, can I interrupt? Chuck has a question.
Yeah, I can't see question. Oh, I do see raised. Yep.
It's a basic question. You put the band on the leg of the bird?
Yes.
And so if it shows up at a backyard feeder, there's a good chance you could see the.
Well, I wouldn't say a good chance. You'd have to be you have to have some really good binoculars or really good camera. So really that recap data really only comes from catching the bird again, having it in the hand, being able to read that number, or if somebody finds the bird dead and sees that it has a band, and there's actually on the band there's a number to call, or actually I think they have the website now, birdbanding.com or something like that, and you can report it there.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So many of you have probably seen the headlines that came out several years ago that studies from multiple sources showed that in the past 50 years, so in less than one human lifetime, we have lost 2.9 billion birds. That's a third of our birds gone since 1970. And unfortunately, these are common birds as well. There are a variety of species. Whoops. So 1/3 of all North American bird species are in urgent need of conservation action to avoid extinction. And the main cause, of course, is habitat loss. So we're running out of the habitats that we need to support these birds, and the habitats that we have are sort of losing their ability to support even the most basic bird life for reasons such as climate change, non-native plants. There's 48 million acres of lawn in the US, and most of that is sort of this novel habitat that doesn't include the plants that the birds evolved with. So we'll go through this fast since it's depressing. So we mentioned habitat loss. Outdoor cats is another big reason for bird declines. American Bird Conservancy did some studies and calculated that over 2 billion cats in the US, including feral and house cats, kill collectively over 2 billion birds each year in the US alone. Phenological mismatch. So this has to do with climate change. So birds, come back from South America to not the right climate, not the right seasonal weather that they're used to, and that may cause some, their caterpillars that they're feeding their young to not be available, that sort of thing. Light pollution is a big one. So many of these birds are traveling by night to their destinations. And of course, you can see how these lights would be confusing, and they can run into skyscrapers. Pesticides, of course, are a big one. And window collisions, even just with residential areas. So that's somewhere in the millions of birds each year die from hitting windows because, of course, they don't see the window. They just see a continuation of habitat.
Blake,
So,
I just want to go back. I know it's one of the things that people who are opposed to wind turbines often talked about is bird collisions. And I know for the predatory birds, it's especially important. But I'm just noting that drivers of bird decline wind turbines are not on this list.
Oh yeah, this is not a comprehensive list. This is just, yeah, that's a good point. This is just some of the heavy hitters, like the biggest
Right.
ones that we know of. But yes, I'm sure you could go on and on.
But it's not one of the
Yeah.
biggest ones.
Well, not one of the ones I guess that they have the most information on. But I'm sure it's up there. Also like open oil pits, you know, plastic, seabirds ingesting plastic. Yeah, we could go on and on. But so we love birds because humans are hardwired for connection with nature. And I always say that birds sort of provide that copacetic anchor that allows us to connect with the natural world and kind of get outside of our own thoughts. So, you know, watching a bird go about its business during the day, you know, can help pull us out of any sad thinking or ruminations and make us kind of feel connected. And listening to them sing actually has been proven to give us a greater sense of well-being. And then, of course, just watching their colors and enjoying their diversity ignites our fascination and our joy. Whoops. Let's see if that'll play for me. This is a wood thrush singing. Did you all hear that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Great. Yeah, one of the most beautiful songs in the bird world, and the wood thrush are about to return and fill our forest with that beautiful song. So we need birds not only for the joy they bring to our lives, but for the life they bring to the world. So they perform a variety of critical roles in ecosystems. They pollinate plants, disperse seeds, eliminate insect pests, rodent pests, roadkill, all of these things. Birds really kind of keep everything in balance, and they're really indicators of the ecosystem health. And when they're not doing well, we're not doing well. So as we learn about birds, we learn about ourselves and the planet. And there's another quote: if we take care of birds, we take care of most of the big problems in the world. So how do we take care of birds better? Well, we need to learn more about their entire annual cycle. So migratory birds, it turns out, before ornithology really only focused on the breeding cycle, the breeding season. What are these birds doing when they're nesting? What habitats are they using? And that sort of defined species is where they were breeding. But now we realize that they have pretty complex lifestyles. They need different habitats throughout different parts of this annual cycle. Molt, autumn migration, overwintering, spring migration, and there's what they call carryover effects. So, for example, conditions on the wintering ground can affect their survivorship and breeding success the following summer. So it all matters, and we need to kind of learn about the whole picture for each of these species we're trying to conserve. We especially need to know more about migration. It's one of the most critical parts of their lives. So mortality during migration is as high as 85% of annual mortality for some songbird species. And this is still the least studied part of the annual cycle. And that's mostly because previously, before Motus, we didn't have tags small enough to study some of these smaller species, smaller songbirds, smaller animals like bats, even butterflies. So Motus is Latin for movement, and what it is a collaborative research network, international research network, that uses coordinated automated radio telemetry to study the migration and aid in the education and conservation of these migratory animals. And so to date, it allows us to track the smallest animals with the highest temporal and geographic precision of all of the different tracking technologies. So the way it works is you have a tag, it's either battery or solar powered, and it goes on the back of the bird. It has an antenna. Each tag has an individual code. So then it's sort of like Morse code in the sky. So then the infrastructure needs to be there. So that's the second bubble. You see that looks like an old-fashioned satellite dish or just a radio transmitter. So you have those towers everywhere that you can, and they can pick up the signal about 12 miles away. So any bird, any tagged animal or bird, bat flying by within 12 miles gets logged as its individual ID, where it was banded. All of its information gets logged into a centralized database. This is the largest wildlife database really out there in the world today. And so it's really community science. And all the researchers now are working together using this system. And then it also relies on partners to put the towers up. So there's towers, on schools, there's towers on private game lands, there's towers on private property. So really anyone that's willing to kind of help upkeep these towers and make sure that they're functioning and able to be used by researchers. So the tags are never more than 3% of the bird's body weight. So your study species kind of depends on whether you're going to use a battery powered or a solar powered tag. And then also kind of what you're studying. Are you studying these broader landscape movements, or do you want to study the finer movements, the more local movements? So this is a picture of a student who studied baby wood thrush in Rushton Woods a few years ago. She tagged some babies, nestlings, once they were big enough to carry the tag, the nano tag. And then since we only have one tower at Rushton, she went around with a handheld receiver to locate what these birds were doing after they left the nest, because traditionally songbirds, that's like one of the most dangerous times, right after they leave the nest. And so we wanted to learn more about where they're going, what habitats they're honing in on. And so they set that pulse rate, so the researcher can determine how often that tag is sending out signals. And if you want, again, these fine scale movements, you'll set it to a higher burst rate. So that's what she was trying to get. And so the way that it's on the bird, it's sort of like a backpack. It's a leg loop harness, and it goes around the legs and over the back. It's sort of like backpack meets fanny pack, sort of like Angelina Jolie. Tomb Raider. That's what the birds leave us as. Now they're ready to send information for the rest of their species. It allows us to spy on birds. So we can see minute details like how long they're staying over in a habitat, using it as a refueling stop during migration. You can see when the bird decides to leave, how long it stayed, post-fledging dispersal, like with the baby wood thrush I just showed you. And again, these small landscape movements. But the bigger picture, the real edge that Motus gives us, is uncovering these broader migratory pathways and giving us more knowledge on the limiting factors that are driving population declines. So then we can start identifying the regions that we need to conserve, and then help the research then guides management. So for example, just to give you an idea of the Motus edge, since 1963, over 3,000 gray-cheeked thrushes and Swainson's thrushes were banded using traditional banding, just the metal band. And only 6 were ever encountered since 1963. So then in 2016, a researcher in Colombia, which is a stopover site that they use before heading to North America, their North American breeding grounds, the researcher fitted 36 gray-cheeked thrushes with nano tags. And that spring, they were able to track 14 of these birds, their migration routes across the Caribbean and into North America. So I'll show you. See if this works. Can you see this map?
No.
Are you
Not
still,
yet.
what's that?
Not yet.
Are you still in my PowerPoint?
Just a gray screen, Blake. There it goes. Well, back to the other.
Hold on. Share. Here we go. I'm a little rusty. I haven't done a Zoom in a while. Here you go. So now I'm going to show you. Can you see that now?
There, yeah.
You see the map?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're on motus.org, and I'm going to play, and these are maps that the public can look up. So this was the 14 gray-cheeked thrushes. You're going to watch them as they fly north from Colombia.
Oh, wow.
So pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So you can
That
watch
is very cool. Oh, and they're coming back.
Yeah, I just reversed it.
Well,
So
that's-
yeah, a lot of really cool stuff. You know, we're able to actually kind of connect the dots of these birds' migratory routes. So let me get back into the PowerPoint here. I think I'm back in here. Did I do that seamlessly?
Yes.
All right. Here's
Birds have the power to touch our hearts with their beauty and songs, to surprise and fascinate us with their behavior, to inspire us with amazing feats of strength and endurance. Some songbirds migrate thousands of kilometers every year in challenging conditions. Birds play critical roles in our ecosystems. They pollinate plants and spread seeds. They help control insects. Birds are also valuable indicators of change. Many populations have been seriously declining for decades. 1/3 of North American bird species need urgent conservation action to avoid extinction. We have to act now to protect the habitats and systems that support all life on Earth. But how? Scientists must unlock the mysteries of migratory birds and study their movements on breeding grounds, along migration routes, and in wintering areas. The Motus Wildlife Tracking System uses tiny tracking devices and a network of hundreds of receiving stations strategically located throughout the Western Hemisphere. Motus is yielding spectacular discoveries. Now, researchers can safely track bird movements over vast distances and with incredible detail to pinpoint the greatest threats to vulnerable species. The results help us identify conservation priorities and direct efforts and funds for maximum impact. Get involved today. You can help us.
all right. So that just gave a nice overview and some visuals. You got to see the leg loop harness of the nano tag. So here are just some kind of mind-blowing numbers here of the Motus Wildlife Tracking System. So there's 34,000 plus animals have been tagged. This is all since like 2015. It's pretty new. 291 species tagged, over 1,500 receiver stations worldwide. And then, so this is kind of what the Northeast looked like just before 2017, before the Willistown Conservation Trust got involved with Motus. So you can see there's the yellow dots are where there are Motus towers. So you can see that there's a void in Pennsylvania, New York, the whole Northeast. And so we started this Northeast Motus collaboration, so between Project Alnet, Willistown Conservation Trust, and the Ned Smith Center for Nature and Art. Got some state wildlife grants, and started an array. So we did build a whole fence line across the state so that any bird kind of flying, many of the birds use what's called the Atlantic Flyway, which sort of follows the Appalachian Mountain Range as they're going north and south. So we wanted to close the gap so that any animal that was tagged was able to, have a dot logged, as they flew past this array, this fence line. So this is just a little video of the towers going up over the years since 2017 and the gaps being filled. So that's sort of, one of the most important parts of Motus is you've got to have the infrastructure there. So really have filled in the dots. So able to start getting more information on these migratory pathways, thanks to many different partners, again, private and public. And so now we're going to start pivoting from installation to research. So we hope to start studying these cute little guys, the northern saw-whet owls, which we only traditionally banned the regular bird banding, but we hope to start learning more by nano-tagging them. And also wood thrush. This is a common bird that is declining. So there's some national projects deploying tags and trying to learn more about the wood thrush and what they need to survive. These are just some other of the birds that have been picked up on our Northeast Motus array. Common nighthawk, semi-palmated sandpiper. It's a little surprising that Pennsylvania, the airways above Pennsylvania are actually a throughway for shorebirds, which many people don't think about. But when they're coming from Canada to South America, they often stop over in the Delaware Bay and they fly right over the Northeast, including the threatened red knot. And so these are just 142 million detections in the Northeast Motus collaboration. So let's get into some applications of Motus. So I have some case studies to show that it helps us learn about determining timing of migration, identifying the stopover sites, and informing conservation decision making. So this is a picture of a beautiful Cape May warbler gleaning insects off of a leaf as they do in the spring. So the timing of migration is a complex web of interactions for a bird. Nature is made of millions of intricate interactions. And if you're mismatched and you arrive too early or too late, it can have repercussions on survivorship and reproductive success, because you might be mismatched with food availability, predator abundance, or the amount of vegetation cover to help you hide from predators. So, for example, climate change, there's been a study, not Motus, but otherwise, climate change is making our leaf out happen earlier. And these warblers, these insect gleaners, they follow, as they're coming north to breed, they follow the leaf out. And as they're picking insects off of these tiny leaves, they don't have to expend that much energy because the leaf petioles are small. But now that our leaves, you guys probably noticed how fast the leaves came out this spring. So there's some evidence that these birds need to spend more energy gleaning insects off of these larger leaves. And then when you compound that with needing to migrate and all of the massive energy required for that, we don't know what kinds of effects that could be having. So just an example of how climate change can affect the timing of migration. But what are some other things that affect the timing of migration? Motus has uncovered pesticide exposure can affect the timing of migration, as well as fuel loading. Fuel loading in birds is, of course, fat. And so here's a study about the negative effects of pesticides that Motus showed. So it showed that these migratory songbirds were negatively affected. This is a white-crowned sparrow. That was the study species for this project. So neonicotinoids are one of the most widely used pesticides in agriculture today. You guys have probably heard of it. It's linked to colony collapse disorder in honeybees and is generally not good in the environment. So farmers can't even buy corn or soybeans that haven't been treated with this pesticide, and it's systemic. So the seed is coated in the neonicotinoid, and then it stays with the plant throughout its whole life. So you have it coming up, it's in the nectar, it's in the roots, it's going into the soil, it's going into runoff into the waters. So a lot of non-target organisms are affected by the neonics. So these
Hey,
researchers,
Blake, can I ask a question? Is there anything that like Joe Public or Josephine Public can do to oppose the coating of seeds with pesticides? Do you
That's a
know?
good
I mean,
question.
like, so that it's awful. And it
Yeah,
was interesting that you had a picture of sunflower. So I always imagined that it was on corn, like that was the thing that they put it on. But to think that they put it, is that what we're not supposed to buy at Home Depot? Plants that have that in it?
yeah, I think that was a recent movement. Yeah, or they have to label it now, I think.
Yeah.
I noticed some of their plants are labeled was treated with neonics.
Oh.
Even like some of their house plants, I remember seeing that.
So
But
I
yeah,
feel
I mean, it's a good question. I'm not
Yeah.
sure how you go about doing it, but I know that the first step is sort of having this research, you know, to go and to prove that it is bad, that it is negatively affecting birds. And then, you know, then you're sort of armed with weaponry to, you know, make the fight against it. But so particularly songbirds, they found, so this is the white-crowned sparrow is a beautiful sparrow that breeds way high up in the tundra, like in high alpine meadows, and it likes wide open areas during migration, often agricultural areas where it feeds on seeds. So it was a great study subject for this. So they exposed some of the white-crowned sparrows to a small amount of neonic and others they didn't expose. The ones that were exposed that ate the seeds that contain neonics, the birds, so neonicotinoids actually mimic nicotine. So the birds that were exposed actually kind of got anorexic. They stopped eating. They needed to be fueling up for migration, but they weren't fueling up as fast as they should. It took them on average 3 days longer than the ones that were not treated, the normal birds. And so this could have affected their survival and breeding success. So they're leaving with a lower mass than they should. They're taking longer to get to where they need to go to breed. So this can have real implications. So it might be why some farmland and migratory birds are in decline. This is a study with the gray-cheeked thrush. So this was a study that Motus used to uncover the importance of fuel loading on the timing of migration. So the gray-cheeked thrush is a very secretive thrush that breeds in spruce fir forests of the far north, where the tundra meets almost where the boreal forest meets the tundra. So really far north. They're capable of sustained flights of, you know, hundreds of miles. And so they overwinter in South America, and they stop over in northern Colombia. You can see on this map, they use that as a refueling site before they hop over the Caribbean to North America. So they studied the different fuel loads of birds before they departed. And the ones with the higher fuel loads, or they had packed on more fat, they had spent time in better habitat to be able to pack on more fat. Those birds were able to accomplish migration faster and at a faster rate. So they didn't have to stop over as many times, and they could fly further without stopping over. So therefore they got to their breeding grounds faster than the birds that left in lower condition. So this has implications for the importance of stopover habitat. So it proves that we need to conserve these places that birds are using, these significant places that have what they need, the food they need, the native plants they need to pack on that fat. So for example, native plants have berries that are higher in fat than non-natives. So the quality of habitat matters. And this study was really interesting. Actually, one of these, the gray-cheeked thrush that left Colombia in the best condition, actually set a record for the species, which we were able to understand through Motus. So after it left Colombia, it showed up just 46 hours later in southern Ontario, and that's like 2,700 miles. It must have made a nonstop flight, 47 miles per hour. Is what it came down to. So Motus can also be used to estimate rates of flight, rates of migratory flight. So pretty amazing feats these birds are doing. Again, identifying these critical stopover sites is going to be a high conservation priority for declining migratory birds. So this is a picture when we have a bird in the hand, we blow sort of in the wishbone area, and that's where they store their fat. So 95% of the fuel that a bird needs for migration is from fat. So, and they get that from high quality habitat. And in terms of time, the highest cost of migration happens in stopover, not in the directional sustained flight. So they're spending time in these refueling sites. And so those are really critical. So the birds, the gray-cheeked thrushes that I just showed, they stop over in what's called the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. This is one of the most irreplaceable regions on the earth, they say. So this is the mountain range in northern Colombia that has been discovered to be used by over 40 of our migratory songbird species. So rapidly identifying more places like these that birds need is how Motus is going to help us conserve species. So we know a lot of these stopover sites for things like shorebirds, but it's largely, especially in the neotropics, we don't know a lot of the places that our small songbirds need. So like this yellow-billed cuckoo. So this is a common bird in steep decline that Motus has recently revealed also uses that area in northern Colombia, the Santa Marta Mountains, as an important stopover site on its migration. Here's another little thrush called a Swainson's thrush that Motus has revealed some other nuances. These birds trade time for energy, and they have other stopover sites that are just for molting. So most birds molt before they migrate. So molting is changing out all their feathers. It's sort of like an oil change. So you have to be fresh to migrate. But there's all these different, of course, life strategies, and Motus is able to reveal what habitats, again, these various species need. So in the end, Motus is helping us, is using research to then help inform the decision making. And it'll help us learn about all different bird species, even seabirds eventually. Right now, there's a gap because of course, it's 12 miles each tower. So even if you had a fence line of towers on the coast, you can only extend out over the open ocean so much. And so they're actually talking about in the future using these wind farms as places where Motus towers, Motus receiving stations could be located to help us learn more about these overwater movements, and also to learn more about the implications of this offshore wind energy, these wind farms. And even birds like the black-polled warbler, so it's not just seabirds that are flying out over the open ocean. Turns out this black-polled warbler has the longest overwater flight of any songbird. So it shoots out, so during its fall migration, they shoot out from the coast, the Gulf of Maine, out over the Atlantic Ocean. in a nonstop flight that takes them 80 hours and lands them 2,000 miles down to the northern tip of South America. So it's a nonstop 80-hour flight, and this bird weighs half of an ounce. So pretty incredible.
Wow.
And so here, I'm going to click on this. So now I just want to show you, let me get you to where I am. So now I'm on the website. You should see that now. You see that?
Yeah.
Yep.
So here's the Motus website. If you wanted to go on and explore, you'd go to explore data. And so let's say we want to look up the Rushton Farm Tower. So I'm going to look in receiver locations. Map is loading here. Okay. So then I'm just going to zoom in. Oh, I'm gonna get back over to Pennsylvania here. So all the yellow dots are Motus towers. And is that Rushton? Yeah, we got Rushton there. So I'm going to click on the receiver. Did I do that right? Rushton
What's the
Farm.
website for this? Is it's a Motus?
Motus.org.
Thanks.
Yes. Yeah. Oops. Oh. Somehow I messed. Oh, now we're in Africa. Hold on, I'll get back. This back. I promise when I get you here, it's gonna be really cool. Somehow I clicked on something. Let's see. Yeah, so you go to motus.org, you can click on explore by species, but I just wanted to show you okay. So I'm going to do tags detected. You click on tags detected, it says 60. So let's do Rushton Farm. Let's do a table. Okay, so now it's pulled up a table.
Wow. Oh, wow.
So
It's so cool.
yeah, so these are all the birds tag birds that have flown over Rushton Farm. So it starts you for some reason at 2022. If you wanted to see who flew over recently, go to page 7. And now what are we on? April. So April 24th, I think is the last. So we have a lot of Eastern towhees. And that is because we have a PhD student who's tagging Eastern towhees and studying their habitat use. But like on March 25th, we had a woodcock. On March 26th, we had an American kestrel. I'm going to go back to the first page here because there's one blackpoll warbler on May 24th, 2022. So let's click on the blackpoll warbler that went by Rushton on May 24th. Let's look at all of this blackpoll warbler's detections on a map. So it says show detections in a table, timeline, or a map. We're going to click on a map so that we can see this bird's entire journey that it took to get to Rushton. And here it is.
Wow.
I'm going to play it. There you go. Well, it goes really fast. So you can toggle this. I always toggle it to like 60 because these maps go so fast. So let's start at the beginning again. So now you can see April, it's down in Colombia. May, now it's crossing the Caribbean. May 10th, May 11th, 13th, 14th, 17th. Now it's going to Virginia. Hits Rushton May 24th. So then it's up in New England by June. So pretty cool.
Yeah.
Blake, I have a question. All the movements you've shown us is from south to north. What happens then to the bird?
Well, what do you, so they're going to their breeding grounds.
But I mean, you presumably they're not dying there, right? Like,
No, it just means that that's the end point of the data received.
And
Maybe-
the battery died, doesn't it, after how long?
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. The battery died, probably. Or maybe the tag fell off. They're just, it can fall off over time. It's just like an elastic, almost like a jeweler's elastic. So yeah, but generally the battery probably finishes. So on these small birds, you can't have a large battery.
right.
So, whoops. So I mentioned Eastern towies, and you saw a lot of those on that chart there, and that is because Shelley, the lovely lady here, is putting nano tags on our local Eastern towies to help us learn more about this early successional shrubland habitat that people hate. So unfortunately, we have a lot of people with, a lot of land out here in Willistown, and as soon as they see shrub habitat, they think it's ugly and they clear it and they brush hog it. And it's really important for birds. We've long known this. And so we're trying to use Motus to, again, further prove this so that we can start to change people's aesthetics and what they think is beautiful. So a lot of baby birds, after they leave their nest, they head straight, even birds that are born in the forest, like wood thrush, they leave the forest because shrubby areas are safer and there's denser food, denser cover from predators for young bird learning how to live. And then shrub habitat is hugely important also for migratory birds, for the refueling that we talked about. And then the Eastern towhee is just kind of a poster child. That's the habitat they always prefer, that they nest in, that they overwinter in, everything.
Can you say a little bit more about the shrubs? Like what's a shrub? Name a shrub.
Yeah, so shrubland, a shrub habitat is what would exist. So naturally you'd have a meadow, a field, you can picture a field, and then if you never mow that field, eventually you start getting the woody growth and the shrubs come in like like viburnums, like sumac.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
it's between it's not a full tall tree. You know what I mean? So a shrubland would happen after a field has matured, and then after many years the shrubland would then turn into a forest. Then you'd get your taller trees coming in, and so it's a natural succession. And so birds rely on having those varied habitats, field, shrubland, forest, and we have sort of taken it upon ourselves to pick and choose what we like the looks of. So,
and I've got to tell you, it's so interesting in all the conversations that I've heard around native plantings. I haven't necessarily heard any specificity around shrubland, right? I've heard,
yeah,
pollinators, but not a shrub area for birds. That's so interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your insight. Yeah, that's interesting to hear. That's, I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, we focus a lot on the different structures that the birds need. So hopefully this project will help us, start educating people more about shrubland and the importance of it and the structure that it offers for birds.
Yeah, hopefully.
And then this is our most recent big Motus collaboration locally in southern Chester County. There's still a lot of farmland, and there are these grassland birds, and the grassland birds, so all birds, as I mentioned, depressingly are declining, but some are declining faster than others, and the grassland birds are the heaviest hit, probably because of our agricultural regimens. Everything's large scale now, chemicals, clearing the surrounding habitat. But a quarter of our grassland bird species are what's called tipping point species, like this bobolink pictured here. And these are birds that have lost half of their populations in the past 50 years and are on track to lose another half in the next 50. So in southern Chester County in the greater Doe Run area, there's a lot of opportunity because there are these big grasslands open. There are these big, it hasn't been developed because there are these farms, but hasn't been a whole lot of education on how they can work around the birds. So some of the farming practices are detrimental to birds like bobolinks because they mow very early. These birds nest right on the ground. And of course, mower comes, they don't stand a chance, the babies. So you're not having as much reproductive success as you could. So we developed the grassland bird collaboration. We are tagging bobolinks, nano tagging. Grassland birds are notoriously very difficult to catch. So you have to go out there before sunrise, set up your nets. That's a picture of the mist nets that we use to capture birds for any sort of bird banding. And then you can see a bobolink is just perched on the top of it, messing with the banders. So it's because it's such wide open habitat, it's difficult to catch them. You need to set the nets up around an audio lure and a decoy and hope that they go in. But we did eventually nano tag 20 different bobolinks. You can see the upper left corner is that leg loop harness. So 20 bobolinks were nano tagged so that we can understand these local movements as well as regional movements. And it was combined with nest searching. So again, these nests are right on the ground, very vulnerable. And they were able to find some of these nests and color tag the nestlings. So that's so that you can re-site them, keep an eye on them, sort of see when they are getting to the age where they could escape mowers so that we can educate the landowners and the farmers a better time for mowing. And it turns out end of June, if they just wait till the end of June, then these guys can have a fighting chance. They can flap their way out of the way of a mower. So what Motus revealed on these bobolinks, in addition, is that they weren't seeing the boundaries, of course, that humans see. So there's all these different private farms out there, Doe Run Farm, Buck and Doe, Schoolhouse Farm. And, one bobolink was going to all of these different farms in one breeding season. So they're using it, they see it all as a connected habitat that collectively provides for all of their habitat needs. So they might have been foraging in one grassland and nesting in another. But implication is that we need to be communicating with all of these farms and making sure we're all on the same page to help these declining birds. So another thing that Motus revealed is that it's a very important stopover site for bobolinks happens to be the Delmarva Peninsula. So our partners up in Maine and Vermont who also tagged bobolinks, their bobolinks also ended up here in the Delmarva Peninsula along the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland and Virginia during early fall migration before they went down to South America. Another interesting thing was that this one male, we were able to track him and he did the exact same thing 2021 and 2022. So they are creatures of habit. And last but not least, we got our first international detection of a bobolink in 2022. And again, he went to the gateway to South America, those forests of northern Colombia. He showed up there. So Motus is revealing the pathways that the birds use and the pathways we need to be able to conserve them. And it really just, when you guys saw that map, you went, oh, wow. Showing these landowners and farmers the birds in the hand and combined with the maps of their tracks, it just changes their brain. And then they want to do the right thing.
Blake, this has been just so wonderful. I want to honor our time and to see if anybody has.
Yep. I'm at the end. And then, so if you want to check out motus.org, whoops, did I just do something? There's other great tools like Bird Migration Explorer. There's curriculum for schools. And then, so that is the end. So any questions? I welcome them.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful.
Amazing, amazing. And I love your enthusiasm.
Oh,
We were,
yeah, and here's all the partners. I'll get out of my screen share so I can see your faces here again. There you are. That's the only thing with Zoom. You're in a room by yourself and you can't.
So Joy has a question.
I just have a quick question. So when I know that there's gaps for the banding, but are the bird bands being put on also as well now, as well as the trackers, or?
Yes, yeah. So every bird in the hand gets a nano tag. And every bird that is getting nano tagged gets a regular band as well, because that's just the protocol. That's what identifies it with the bird banding lab. And if it was found dead somewhere, that would be the thing. If the tag's dead, and the band would be able to identify that bird.
So I have a question. What's the one thing that you could suggest to us that we can do to help support bird health and, offering something to the birds in our area? Or two things. I mean,
Yeah.
I would say I really think the homegrown habitat, that Doug Tallamy stuff is just so important. And
homegrown national. So she's talking about homegrown national park, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So just looking at your own patch of habitat as a place where conservation can happen. Traditionally in the past, we've thought, oh, well, if the birds they have the national park, or there's that, state park over there, they're doing conservation there. But, with the amount of lawn growing in the United States, it's over 48 million acres and growing. We need to, it's sort of like that map of the bobolinks sharing all those different farms. They don't see yards as yards. They could see it as a patchwork of habitat if we just started planting the right things and offering more than just a manicured lawn, making it be more like nature. So having native shrubs, having unmowed areas, supporting the web of life that we're so good at messing up. And everybody always asks me, I always get questions about bird feeding and how important bird feeding is. And I always say it's great to feed the birds, but it's mostly for you. Out of the seeds, the feeders that you're providing. So you can feed them all you want, but they're not able to feed their young seeds. You need to have the native plants that are promoting the caterpillars, which is the main diet of baby birds. So in order to make more birds, to have reproductive success, you need native plants that support the insects.
yeah. My wife and I went down to the Delaware Bay a couple of years ago to watch the red knots.
Oh, you see that.
And we did come across some red knots, I don't know, around Galloway, I guess it is. And so we watched for a couple of hours, and the laughing gulls were it seemed like keeping the red knots on the back lines. The laughing gulls were getting to the eggs from the horseshoe crabs easier, and of course they're about double the size of the red knot.
Oh, wow. Huh.
And so the red knots would sit back and wait for their opportunity to dash past the laughing gulls and get an egg or two, but it looked like it would. Now I pictured from what I had heard before that of the red knots having a little smorgasbord of eggs available to them when they stopped on their travels. But it wouldn't surprise me if they have to wait around. Or it also made me think about what you said about the mismatches of when other species are there and,
Yeah,
and sort of hogging the space and so,
could be, yeah. I hadn't heard about that. I just
It's
know
a
that.
jungle
the-
out there.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Just-
Blake, I want to thank you so much for joining us and
Thank
sharing
you for
your
having me.
information.
Yeah.